Today we're talking about how the blockchain world is moving beyond wrapped assets toward truly omni-chain tokens that can move anywhere instantly. So my guest today is Brian Pellegrino. He's a co-founder and CEO of LayerZero Labs. And we're talking about building infrastructure that's open, permissionless, and doesn't require trust in centralized intermediaries, where assets move seamlessly across chains without fragmentation or compromise. Brian, thanks so much for joining me on this episode of Block by Block.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, before we dive in, we're really happy to have LayerZero at Meridian, where you announced the integration with Stellar. But today, I want to take a few steps back and talk about how blockchains connect. Bridges got us here, but the industry is evolving towards something much more native, where assets move across chains without fragmentation or trust in intermediaries. And that shift opens up this whole new possibility for moving real-world value, and companies like LayerZero are leading the charge. But I just have one thing that I wanted to talk about before. You're not just a CEO and co-founder of LayerZero. You, as I recall, are also, or you were also a professional poker player. Am I right?
Was. The was is important, but yes, I was for a long time, like almost 8 years.
And so poker is all about reading the table, calculating the costs, and knowing when to go all in, right? Yeah.
Very much so.
So when you decided to build LayerZero, what was the bet? What did you see that made you push all your chips all in on this problem?
I think, so I mean, when we started LayerZero, we had no intention to start a company. It was actually the complete opposite. My wife was pregnant with our third child. I'd promised her, I'm going to retire. We're going to be home with the kids. Like, don't worry. And then it has turned into 80-hour weeks and 5 years later. And but I think really, I think maybe some of the best things are born that way. So it really became as a problem we were trying to solve for ourselves as we were tinkering kind of with the technology that existed. And then eventually you have this sort of this sense. It's a thing you're thinking about when you fall asleep. You're in the shower. You wake up in the morning, and just like I'm a very, I guess, obsessive person when it came to that. It was this idea that I couldn't look away from, and I was convinced that somebody else had solved it. Somebody would solve it, and it just wasn't there. And I think most entrepreneurs can relate with the sort of feel or the need to create this thing and have it exist in the world. So it really was just this pull more than anything. Yeah.
I think I should take one step back though and say you had been interested and had done work or at least played around with crypto and blockchain before, even when you were doing your professional poker.
Yeah. So everybody in poker, like very fortunate for kind of unfortunate and fortunate at the same time. In 2011, most of us, young kind of 2007, 2008 era of poker. It was on television a lot. You sort of saw this. And so a lot of us came to the game. We're young, smart kids, and you ended up having a really interesting career where you could make a ton of money. And then all of a sudden, 2011, April 15th, 2011, and you wake up one morning and there's Department of Justice symbols on every one of your websites. And your money is frozen, your career is over, the payment processors are dead. But all of us in that moment found Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin was the way that all of the poker community moved money between the remaining poker sites that existed. And so I found crypto very early. Naturally, an event like that draws you into the sort of early ethos. I saw and deeply understood what it meant to sort of have censorship resistance or have something that was anti-fragile by design. And then, 2013, 2014 was racks of miners in my garage and sort of everything. Smart contracts was okay. Now you're programming and you're really like playing with what this could be. So very much kind of evolved or involved along the evolution of the industry.
That's so interesting. And I mean, it's such a great way. I'm sure it didn't feel great at the time, by the way, but it's such a great way to get introduced to a problem. And it's actually, you're encountering this problem and you're having to figure out how to get around it. So I love that. Let's take a step back though and start with fundamentals. So I was listening to your episode on tokenized where you said that LayerZero is not a blockchain. Instead, you described it as an immutable set of smart contracts that live on every blockchain, rails that any asset issuer can deploy and run themselves. So can you break that down for us? What actually is LayerZero?
First of all, well said. Whoever said that, great. No, that is exactly how I think about it. So really, LayerZero came from this problem of really seeing all of these chains emerge, and for us not being able to interact between them. The problem we were trying to solve for ourselves. Again, we were tinkering, right? So Binance Smart Chain launched. And we saw more volume than Ethereum, more users than Ethereum, and we said, what is this thing actually? And like, take this thing and treat it as fast and cheap, but totally ephemeral. Imagine you can't trust it at all. What would it look like to use this thing and then like roll the result back to Ethereum and see what would that look like? And there just wasn't a way to do it. We built a toy system and we said, oh wait, there is no way to actually move the data or do anything without a central coordinator. Or like, well, that defeats the whole purpose, right? That if you need that, it kind of breaks everything. We're convinced it was solved. We're convinced this, and so it took us some time to get conviction around this. But what we saw was there were many chains, and many chains were being created because largely they have trade-offs in the way we used to build applications monolithically. I used to, write a server that sits in my house, or if you're lucky, a data center. There's just everything was on one device, and now everything that you build is microservices optimized for storage, for compute, for all different layers of vectors of computing trade-offs that you can make. So you have chains that are making trade-offs on these vectors. And naturally, the asset issuers want to be everywhere. The users want to be everywhere. The applications have demand for each of these properties. And so what we saw was a world that was very similar to internet. You can imagine an internet where we hadn't connected all the computers, and it's like, okay, well, I heard about this great thing in Stanford or in DARPA. Like, I guess I got to get on a plane and bring my floppy disk. It's just like that you can't even imagine that world anymore. But that was the world at the time of the chains. There just was no way. You were lucky if a centralized exchange had connected these, and you could kind of route through that as an intermediary bridge in the meantime. And so that is what LayerZero's core purpose is connect all of these emergent virtual machines, connect all of these chains, and allow applications to pass information back and forth. So the way that you think about the internet connecting computers or clusters of computers, networks of networks, that is the core problem, and that's really all LayerZero does. It allows any information to be passed from an application from one chain to another. And on top of that, you can build some pretty cool things, but at its core, that's really what it is.
I want to get into that because I know that you guys call this like a messaging layer versus a bridge, but we're going to get into that next. But I want to ask you this first. What makes a chain a good fit for LayerZero? How do you know that this is going to work and that you can create that interoperability layer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's two. At the end of the day, we are a piece of technology, and so our piece of technology is most. I would guess, like most technologies, wants to be used, right? And so naturally, there are two strong draws. And one draw is a user base in an application, right? There's large applications, large user bases that are draw, and the other is sort of like potential, right? In sort of distribution, and can be assets or AUM, or can be something on the other side. It's really a marketplace on all sides of these things, between supply and demand of assets, of users, and of liquidity of applications, of all of this. And so for us, it really is, you want to find a chain that has maybe a really interesting wedge, really deep. You guys do an unbelievable job with RWAs, with bringing these assets and institutions with distribution into LATAM, into all of these different areas that are just like underserved and underrepresented broadly, but represent an extremely massive sort of opportunity set, actually onboarding people to the technology. And so, what we are looking for is you're either making a bet that this environment has made the right trade-offs to be able to attract these things. You want to be there early, and you want to be like involved in how this thing grows, so you're deeply embedded and bet on the asymmetry of the outcomes. Or it's an environment that says, hey, there's already all of these users and liquidity, or this application has like demand and drawing, and you're saying, okay, we want to make sure we're like connecting that to the rest of the world, because now the rest of the world has very strong demand for a center there. And so it's very much a trade-off along those two vectors.
And you're really looking for, or you're either creating or you're hoping that there's a two-sided market, like that you have the market that sits on both sides. I love that. Yep. Okay, now I'm going to ask you, because I one time made a mistake with one of your team, and I said, well, you guys like operating as a bridge, and they're like, oh, no, we're not a bridge, we're a messaging platform. So tell me about that.
Sure. So we built LayerZero, and the original vision was, think about it as TCP/IP. We have this little packet, a bunch of random bytes sent over the internet from one computer to another. It does some compute, sends it over, and like now we have all this ability. We have all of the sort of financial infrastructure that we have. We are having this conversation now. Like all of this stuff comes from that. But that core primitive, the packet, is what we were most interested. It was really enable not just financial use cases, but naturally what most people thought about is just sending money. And that was the core problem. And so, originally we had said we're just going to launch and we'll just, green fields, people will come, it'll be beautiful, people will build. We realized very quickly, like, there's a bunch of competitive groups, and like, guess what? Like Uniswap and SushiSwap like aren't going to use each other's. They're going to build these things and not use each other's. Aave and Compound are not going. Everyone's going to have these fights, and so we said, okay, we have to make this just easy for people, and so we ended up building Stargate, which is a bridge, sits on top of LayerZero and uses the technology, but really is about how do you move the underlying assets, the core assets that people want, and how do you enable the applications to then leverage that? Because what they want to be like swap here, move the thing over, and like execute a swap in the other environment. They don't care about it, and just like make it easy for them. And so bridging is surely all financial transaction or value transfer is like the number one driver of adoption now, but it's all built on the backbone of the underlying.
Yeah. So bridges actually created this they connected blockchains, but they also created this ecosystem of like wrapped tokens, fragmented liquidity pools, and security risks. So at Meridian, Simon Baxis, so your VP of BD, he mentioned that traditional bridging is also known as the wrapping of assets, has contributed to $600 to $700 million worth of exploits in the last few years. So when you set out to build LayerZero, was it the security risks that drove you? Was it the fragmentation that drove you? Or was it something else that made you think, hey, we can actually do this better?
Yeah. So the journey was first, it was here are these environments, we're tinkering. And we built a little toy game for ourselves and said, how do you do this? And so you can't do it. And we said, surely somebody solved this. And we looked around and we saw the bridges and we said, oh my God, this is like terrifying. We would never use this for
terrifying.
Millions
Why?
of dollars.
Terrifying because
security wise, purely security
yeah.
wise. Yeah, it was. I could not believe for people who cared so deeply, like coming from the sort of origins of Bitcoin and everything, that like these were the things that were being used. And we fast forward a couple of years, and like almost everything that existed at that time has been hacked, like almost all of it, right? So it was interestingly, you're not always right about those things, but we're right. It was really bad. But so then we really got on the problem of, okay, how do you solve this problem? What does this look like? And the key insight that we had at that moment in time was exactly what you're describing: wrapped assets. The thing that's so terrible about wrapped assets is naturally the consumer's way that they interact with an asset. If they use a DEX, if they go on and they swap from asset A to asset B, they bear the risk of the code of the contracts for the duration of the swap, right? For one transaction. Once it's done, they never think about it again. They have their asset, they sit in their asset, they go to sleep for 5 years, they wake up, it's still there, no problem. The problem with wrapped asset is the user carries that risk in perpetuity, right? In a DEX, the LP carries the risk, and the LP is pricing the risk. And they're saying, here's the price of a swap. Here is how much I need to earn for adding this pool, for all of these different structures that you may do. But the LP is a sophisticated actor who's carrying the risk, and the user takes it for a swap and never thinks about it again. In a wrapped asset bridge, the user bears the risk in perpetuity. As long as they hold the asset in their wallet, any moment in time, if the underlying becomes unsecure, if something happens, all these hacks that have happened, it's just zero, gone, right? And so that is just a very different relationship that the user has with the asset. And so for us, the key insight was we're going to make pools of liquidity on each chain. So add a bunch of USDC here and here, and the user adds to this one and subtracts to that one, right? And
do you think, let me ask you, let me interrupt for 1 second. Do you think the user actually knew the risk they were taking with those wrapped assets? I mean, that still happens all the time today. Do you think they understand that risk?
No. I think the sophisticated users, so the number of transactions, no, not really. The really large transactions, yes, very much. But it's a subset of the users for sure. And it was back then was like not talked about at all either.
Right. Okay. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So no, that was the original problem that we were trying to solve is really this wrapped asset problem and create a bridging layer that is native assets, that has that layer of trust, that has rails under, that are immutable, that gives guarantees. And now we've actually moved. I think one of the most interesting things of the industry is at the time it was just, we were very strong about it, but it was not clear that we were going to be right. It was not at all clear. The general guiding principle was that we're going to put our own chain in the middle. And that's what most people do. We're going to put a chain in the middle. We're going to connect everything. It's going to be beautiful because all of the stuff will flow through this chain. And of course, this will be wonderful. And the natural counterfactual to that is if that thing is not secure enough, everything breaks, right? And so what we've seen is that middle chain has never become secure. And for us at the time, we're thinking, okay, Uniswap, Aave, $30-50 billion. They're never going to adopt this, let alone when you talk about JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs settling a trade. Are they going to offset to my validator set, give me write access to their ledgers? Of course they're not going to do that. And so our general principle was we're going to build these endpoints and applications build on top. And what it really allowed is the asset issuers themselves to control their own rails. And that, again, it was just a part of the design that we built. And we weren't sure if people were actually going to do that or if they liked it or everything would be offloaded external validator. And it's become one of our strongest, all of our largest asset issuers in some way own their own rails. They're all totally if one of them, all their secure, everything was breached from them, from all of their other partners validating for everything that they have, it wouldn't affect any other party in the network. There's no systemic risk across these organizations. And that is just incredibly powerful into the underlying and has become a stronger draw for us than anything that we had done prior. And so it really played out interestingly where now it has moved even from these native pools that I was describing in Stargate to really just asset issuer owned rails, which has been fascinating.
And so bridging was the old paradigm and Omnichain is the new paradigm. And when you think about Omnichain and you describe generally what that means, it's all these different asset issuers controlling their own sort of destiny in their own chain. But how is an OFT fundamentally different from a wrapped token? So not just in how it works, but what it makes possible.
Yep. Yeah. So a wrapped token says, I have an asset that exists somewhere, right? I have some asset that exists on a chain. I'm going to pop it into a wrapper. So we're going to deposit into some vault and I'm going to mint, wrapped USDC on this chain and on this chain and on this chain and on this chain or whatever the asset is. And somebody owns that wrapper. First of all, that's the big question. Who owns that wrapper? Because if, something goes wrong with them or they have some admin controls or the security layer, the validation layer across, that carries all the risk. So you just have a larger and larger honeypot on that one vector. And then the main thing is for the chains that there is the native asset. So there is native, let's say USDT that exists on a chain. And then you have, wrapped USDT somewhere else. Guess what? You can't, they're not the same thing. You can't get from one to the other. And so you have all of this fragmentation of the asset itself. You end up having ecosystems. We saw this early on where you would have, hey, there's a new ecosystem and there's 8 different versions of ZUSDT and XUSDT and all of these different versions of the same asset. And it was just a total nightmare for the consumers, for the chains, for the depth of liquidity. And so that's wrapped assets that they represent. OFTs are twofold. One, the asset issuer doesn't really care where the asset lives. All asset issuers are AUM-driven businesses. They care about growth and security. Those are the two things. They want to drive as much AUM as they possibly can, and they care a lot about security. And so the asset issuer itself might have $200 billion out across chains. And before it used to be I'd have 100 billion here and 50 billion here. And then a new chain launched and Solana comes around or something and it becomes very popular and there's a very strong draw. There's no way to get the assets in. So you have an inventory issue. And so now you're relying on third-party market makers, you're relying on centralized exchanges, you're relying on all of these things that typically, oftentimes people are paying 30, 50 bips to get into an ecosystem for no real reason. And so what happens now with an OFT is guess what? The asset issuer owns the underlying contract. So who owns the underlying security? Same person who's issuing your asset. So if it is, WBTC, it's BitGo. If it is USDY, it's on, right, so on and so forth, right? The asset issuer itself owns the underlying rails of that. And typically it's not just them. Typically they'll say, hey, I want to sign off no matter what. So I must say this burn happened and this mint is valid. But I also want Google and X and Y and Z and all these other people to like validate this transaction and backstop me just in case, something happens on my end. And so it's usually a collection of this group.
So you know who the counterparty is in this situation all the time. That's the most important thing.
Yes.
Whereas with the wrapped asset, you don't know who the counterparty is. You might know where the vault sits, but you don't know. You have to trust that that vault is going to continue to sit there and make sure that it represents the asset that is wrapped somewhere else. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And so you have twofold risk. You have whoever is making the vault and whoever is issuing the asset itself.
Yep. Okay. So let me just, if I understand this correctly, so instead of having USDC on Stellar, and then WSDC on Polygon, and then bridged USDC on Arbitrum, all separate, an OFT would just be one asset that exists everywhere at once, issued by the asset issuer.
Yep. And the asset issuer doesn't care where the inventory lives. So if it was 100 billion, 50 billion, 50 billion, and now all of a sudden it wants to be like 125 billion, 50, 25, it's no problem. All they care about is how much total is issued. So I have X in treasury bills or in backing reserve, some amount. I have Y in issued assets, and I need to make sure that Y never exceeds X, right? Like my supply is whole. It is still backed completely. There's no weird events. Nothing is being over minted. It's fully collateralized. And I don't really care if it lives here or here or here or here, how that is split up.
And it doesn't mean that they have to natively issue on all chains.
So technically, it depends. Most issuers now, so again, we're talking Athena and Bitcoin and all of these groups, they do natively issue. And that's kind of the big thing. We don't own the contracts. They own the contracts. So when you talk PayPal, PYUSD is a great example, right? Like they own the underlying, because they're signing off, and Paxos, and they have this structure for who is the validating, but they own the contracts. We don't own the contracts. So it is their own native canonical asset that is minting and burning between these, but it's just a much, much, much lower lift. Whereas before, for them to issue natively, and that was a big lift, for them to issue natively, they need to have so much infrastructure, right? They need to have the infrastructure of what does minting and burning look like in terms of creation and redemption? What does it look like to monitor all of this? What does it look like to do everything? And now with us, we like Circles, CCTP, the entire thing, sunset the whole team, throw it all away. Like you can reinvent the entire thing that they have with the same security, the same attestation layer that they have on top of LayerZero. Like we'll do it in like 8 hours. You know what I mean? It's like a day. We'll sit down in a day. It'll be done. They'll have the exact same thing. And what they get is now they're on contracts that are immutable, that have been battle tested for hundreds of billions of dollars. They have all of the underlying infrastructure for how that is deployed, how it does. And all of the, oftentimes a lot of these asset issuers, they have their own compliance layers, their own restrictions, et cetera. It can be rate limiting. It can be allow list. It can be any of those things. All of that can be done within the same underlying construct. And so it really has made something like, hey, take a CCTP for your own asset and be able to just deploy it instantly with proven infrastructure and architecture, and just makes it dead simple for asset issuers.
And asset issuers usually want to issue natively, but you can take the asset not through bridging, but through this messaging layer and take it without the native issuance on the other chain. Yeah. Okay. Well, this feels like a big fundamental shift. And this unified supply model, what does that unlock? It's like that was impossible before. Are we talking about better capital efficiencies, simpler compliance, or is there something even bigger than that?
Yeah, I mean, so yes to both of those things. It's funny, I used to have to talk about this in a very theoretical sense. I used to be like, well, of course, capital is going to be able to like move more freely. One, because you can move, unlimited size, just arbitrary bytes. It doesn't matter how much you're moving. So you're not paying bips, you're not paying anything. You move unlimited size for, approaching the cost of gas. So now you can arb across markets more efficiently. You can rebalance inventory more efficiently. Market makers or arbitrageurs can take advantage of opportunities. The asset itself becomes more useful. And people just say, yeah, Brian, sure, it sounds great, right? And now we actually have an example where USDT existed and had about $180 billion in circulating supply. And that's largely on Ethereum and Tron and a couple of other networks, right? But the bulk of it was on Ethereum and Tron. And it's like, okay, like none of this other stuff has really brought, like that's where all of the bulk of the value is. And so how much is this kind of frills really worth? And so now USDT Zero comes along and says, hey, we're going to like expand to some newer networks. And we're going to drive some of this sort of adoption across maybe a longer tail than those core networks. And 9 months in, and they have almost $10 billion of AUM added just from USDT Zero, not from Ethereum and Tron and the other networks that existed, just the USDT Zero expansion. So that's like $400 to $450 million direct net profit on the balance sheet. It's like very clear business case. They moved $25 billion of USDT Zero just in the last month alone, just between chains, let alone what's used on chain. So all of this proof of there is the ability to create demand. It is actually a more liquid, more useful asset. It is moving at extremely high velocity, being used very deeply within all of these ecosystems. All of this now has like a very compelling, like, here is the before, here is the after, this segment only, like, here is how much value it created. And so I think it is just extremely, extremely powerful and actually making better and higher utility form of money.
So it's better from a business standpoint. It's better from just the liquidity standpoint. It just makes sense for the asset itself. So you've now got two groups who care really, really deeply about how assets move. It's the developers building the applications, and then of course the issuers. So whether that's Circle or a tokenized bond platform or someone else launching a real world asset on Stellar. So how does the OFT model change things for developers trying to build across multiple chains? So what friction disappears?
Yeah. So one is that it's like, what did the ERC20 do for Ethereum? What did, any token standard do? It really enabled a massive, nobody needed to go and create this thing from scratch anymore every time, right? So it's what any standard does for an industry. And so the OFT is just a battle tested standard. Again, hundreds of billions of dollars moved across it. Tens to hundreds of billions of dollars of assets living on top of it, already battle tested in production for many years, the most widely adopted. And so it just gives you this easy way to say, hey, maybe it's scary to issue on a bunch of different VMs and a bunch of different chains. Maybe there's so much operational complexity that comes with it. Now it's like, here's the standard. It's done. Take a look at this asset that has exactly what you want in terms of rate limiting, in terms of all these features that you're looking for. You can do everything that you need to do in it. And it is just as easy as deploying any other token standard on any other chain that's like very well established. And so you can adopt the OFT. You can do the natural thing that you want to do as an asset issuer, and you can drive into more markets with more users. And you can just focus on what is like the most strategic part of your business, which should be growth. It shouldn't be, how do I build this freaking token contract and monitor and do all those things? Like you want to deal with the compliance of the asset because that's what you have to. You don't want to deal with like, are these events being emitted on a blockchain? And like, how does this work in this standard versus that standard? And so it really is just this consolidating effect. And that's what we've seen is just so much of the industry has really sort of rallied and come around this singular standard.
So it's so great too, because we have so few standards in crypto and blockchain. And so it's really nice to see a standard that people can stick to. I think we're going to see more of those coming through, but this really just gives the issuer control in a very simple, unified way. Programmability, control, compliance hooks, all those things exist in this.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's and getting the distribution that they need, essentially. Yep. So at SDF, so we really believe in financial infrastructure should be open. Anyone should be able to build without asking permission. So is LayerZero permissionless in that same way?
100%. So like the core tenets of LayerZero, and we held to them probably to an extreme that most, at least in this day, don't do as often. Entirely immutable. So every contract is entirely immutable. Our general thesis is your largest applications, your largest institutions, they shouldn't need to trust us, even if we were completely malicious. So it is a protocol and the truest sense of protocol. So the underlying code is immutable. We have the ability to add new libraries. So new features come around something. but it is entirely opt-in. And so you never need to change. We cannot remove old libraries. So we can't censor. We can't take away your ability to do something or change anything that has existed. We can just add new functionality, and it's an append only and entirely opt-in. And then the other thing that is very important is the way the protocol is built. Yes, entirely permissionless, and I won't go on the technical tangent that we could go down, but very strictly enforced on censorship resistance in terms of every message must be validated or verified in the exact order that it was received. You cannot arbitrarily drop packets. You build this in application logic. The application can say, hey, I want to take packets and I want to throw them away. But at the underlying Rails level, we have zero ability to ever be able to do that. And so you really have this deep embedded, again, immutability, censorship resistance, and permissionless in the protocol itself, which again, at the time, we cared about very deeply. I didn't know how much other people cared. A lot of people were just kind of like, I want something that works. Luckily, we hit the intersection of the two, but it's really become a very strong driving factor. And I think when you get to real scale and to transactions and institutions of size, it matters.
Well, certainly, I would think the immutable history part matters, because I think you need to be able to go back and prove, to the extent anyone has questions later. And I think the other piece of it that's also really important is the ability to the censorship piece isn't something that I thought about until you just started talking about it, to not be able to go and remove libraries. Is that just a promise, or is it technically you're not able to do that?
Technically impossible. It is an append only validation library, and you may always point to anything in the past. So an application has come, they're set on, I'm just going to arbitrarily, library 6. We can never remove out library 6. We can never change library 6. We can only add library 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and they can optionally use them if they want to. So very strictly enforced. And again, the code is immutable. Couldn't change it if I wanted to. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so you've used the phrase zero slippage transfers before. So when talking about moving value between chains, that almost sounds too good to be true for anyone who's used a bridge and watched their fees eat into their transactions. So can you break down what that actually means and why this is especially important for ecosystems like Stellar, where the whole point is moving value reliably and affordably and not trading through liquidity pools?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think last month we had 2 of our largest transactions ever, and it really was such an illuminating moment for me, because you launch your protocol. We launched in 2022, and it's like you see it come into the world, and you kind of know most of the people who are using it, right? There's people who somehow they're asking you questions, you're building relationship. Last month we did $38 billion of volume, which is about 5 times what Western Union does in a month. It's about 2.5 times Wise. You're like, really moving more money than most institutions in the entire world around moving specifically like, cross-chain, cross-border transaction. And then the other thing, we had 2 individual transactions, one for 550 million and one for 800 million. And I realized that I have no idea who did them, right? Like no clue, absolutely no idea. So one, it's awesome to see like this level of trust in the underlying protocol, in the architecture, and now it's being used in production, that somebody is sending $800 million in a single transaction. But 2, on the other part, and people ask me, because LayerZero it really is a messaging layer. It is very important, not a bridge. What that means is the asset issuer, all of the movement of that, so it's just updating a ledger. It's just burn 800 million here, mint 800 million there. It's for just a couple of bytes. You move them over, and that's it. And so, from a bridge sense, you see $100 million dollars go across, and people are like, "You guys are rich. It's great," and it costs like 11 cents or something. And I cry a little bit, and but it's like it's great. It's like that's what the technology is built to do. And so, yes, it really is. Again, that $800 million transaction, realistically is like it costs less than $1. It is almost nothing. It has nothing to do with the size of the transaction. It's not BIPs based. It's not flow based. It is just a piece of data that is moving within this application, the application happens to be, digital dollars that are updating their own internal ledger.
It's such an interesting point when you think about the way the remittance world works, and how I get it. I know that there needs to be a base level fee when you're dealing with folks who have their feet on the ground in different countries, when you're taking cash off, for example. But it's so interesting that it's based on the size of the transaction. how much and sometimes based on percentages of that. So, but for institutions and for remittance platforms, it's like this is moving serious volume. It's not just a better experience, but it's a completely different cost structure.
Yep.
And that's pretty huge. I mean, when I think about remittance companies and the traditional financial infrastructure that exists, it matters how much they're moving, but then lots of people have to eat the cost on the other side.
Yep.
It's really awesome. I mean, I love it, and I love to think about it as just moving that data. And it's something that, back from the Web 2 world, we always thought about it this way. When you're dealing in financial infrastructure, you always think about moving the money. And here you're moving the money through moving data packets, because that's what we can do with this infrastructure, which is awesome. Okay, I want to shift gears for just a minute, and building something this foundational where you're not just launching a product, but you're really trying to change how an entire industry thinks about interoperability. This is a different kind of challenge. So what's been the hardest part for you? Is it the technology itself, educating the market, getting people like me not to say bridge, or getting people to unlearn the old mental models around bridges and these wrapped tokens?
Honestly, I think the hardest part more than anything is just patience, right? Like I stood up and I gave a talk a couple of years ago, and I said, listen, I've been here for a long time. At every step of the way, originally it was just cypherpunks, it's just people who really deeply believed in the underlying. At every step of the way, the institutions fought kicking and screaming. Or if they could have snapped their fingers and killed the technology, they would have done it 1,000 different times. Like, the reason it is being adopted now is because it is inevitable. There is no choice. So, like, making a last mile compromise now to say, oh, like, look at who's almost at the table, like, let's centralize these elements, or like make these, it's like, no, like, the whole point and the whole reason we've already won, it's happened. And so, like, I stand up and I talk to the team, and I say, like, listen, like, we're living at this unbelievable moment in time where a couple of things are happening. And one is, if you look at just the mobility of dollars, there's this really interesting graph I saw the day of the mobility of money, and it went from the mid to late 1800s until 1914, just like straight up. And there's all these articles around the world, newspapers being written of war is over, and globalization and trade has solved all issues and everything. It's like 1914 happens, it just like drops off a cliff, and like there's tariffs and there's all of this stuff between countries, and like nothing moves. And it wasn't until like 1980s when the mobility of money and globalization like started to creep back up. And what actually happens now, and all of that is it's very easy at the government level to enforce these things. It's trade, it's things in and out of countries, etc. But if you look at, Tether is arguably one of the best businesses in the world. $15 billion of net profit on like 100-person headcount. Every bank, every institution looking at this and saying, what the heck is happening? But like, the whole business is built from the bottom up. You're looking at the major markets. It's like, it's Egypt, it's Turkey, it's Nigeria, it's Argentina. It's places where the citizens have access for financial instruments. They have access or demand for dollars. And now it has shifted where you needed top down and you needed sort of local regulation and local governments. Now it's like anybody with a smartphone and a connection to the internet now has access to these things. It's an entirely bottoms up approach to how some of this is being rebuilt. And so I was telling the team, like, listen, we are living through, like, the tectonic plates are shifting, and everybody sort of can see what's happening. And if you think about 5 to 10 years from now, like, there is a world fundamentally that money, and not only money, but the entire global financial system built around all of this, looks drastically different at the technology layer than it does right now. And that's not to say all the institutions are gone. It's not to say, it's like they're going to adapt and they're going to figure out how to take their distribution channels, how to use this technology, how to like do all of this. But it has a chance to look very, very different than it does today. And just to have the patience to just like sit and have conviction in what you're building, and building the right product is difficult. And you have to, rally people around that. And you have to take the times when the market was crashing and it's like, okay, well, now there's only $1 million being moved a month. And then slowly adoption and real use cases, like now it's $1 billion a month, and now it's $38 billion a month. And you know what I mean? It's like, it's that itself, I think, is like a superpower. And I think it is very hard. The world is so noisy just to stay critically focused. Right? I have so much respect for people who have stayed the course, who's been in the industry for a long time and care about solving this problem and really working to actually solve the thing, not just like I'm solving it when it's cool and now I'm doing something else. It's like, that is hard, but I think it pays off. And I think it's like rewarding to have that conviction, is to build something that you have clear line of sight on the other side. So the technical stuff, it's like, I love that. I love what we're building and how to build it. Building the company as a technologist, as like product, I think company building is very difficult for me. There's definitely challenges of me going through like running a company more than building a specific thing, like a more comprehensive thing. But more than anything, again, I think you just see time after time. You have seen it many times. Everybody who is around you is just gone, and they're just fading away. And it's just the patience to just be here and believe in the problem and solve the problem and see it through to the end. And I think,
I think that's absolutely true. It's so funny, when you were talking, I was thinking so much of what I say about the traditional infrastructure is that it was built for the few and not the many. And then when you think about what you just said, is that it's the many are building it for the many. And that is like such a great way to think about blockchain. And when you have an open permissionless network that allows these kinds of things, and it allows people to solve problems at the application layer, but on this open system that is built by lots of people. And that to me is what the beauty is. And when you talked about the fact that patience, I mean, we've been focused on payments, asset issuance, and really solving this everyday, like everyday financial services since the inception of the network. And it has not been cool to be in that space the whole time. It's cool now though. It's back to being
cool now.
It's back to being cool. But for a long time, it was all the other things that weren't. So I totally get it. And the patience is frustrating. You have to keep your eye on the ball. You can't focus on the shiny objects because, boy, they're fun to look at and sometimes fun to play with, but they often disappear. So it's like a keen focus on that. When I first came here, Jed used to talk about how important it was that money should move as fast as sending an email. It's no longer cool to say that because people don't like to email. I started saying like an instant message. Maybe you should say Snapchat or something. I don't know. But it's now moving as fast as like tapping to pay. We're also used to that now. So technology just keeps accelerating, and our expectations really, really change with it. So when Omnichain infrastructure becomes the standard, when assets just exist everywhere without friction, what becomes possible that isn't already possible today? What will developers be building 5 years from now that seems like today like science fiction? Like what are those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I think one, it is a complete abstraction of the underlying chains itself. I think it is purely the user doesn't need to care. The application developer cares deeply. They care what database they're using. They care, about all of these designs. The user doesn't care. And so it is a full and complete abstraction of chains, of gas, of all of these different things. And I think it is a developer being able to build in a way that takes advantage of the trade-offs of different networks of, hey, this network is extremely good at payments. This network has an incredible storage model, and I need my application to be able to, leverage each of these things in the way that I would leverage when I'm building a Web2 or a modern sort of computing application, and in a way to tie that together and to share state across those things, and having a orders of magnitude more complex application that unifies across multiple environments is incredibly fascinating. But in general, I think the question itself is, one thing I love, I read a lot. I was just tweeting the other day is I read like 500 pages of Jeff Bezos. Every word he ever wrote, I wrote a 35-page memo of the thing. But the thing that stuck out to me the most out of all of it was that exact concept, which I think so few people do well, which was just, here is where we are in the world. And the experience kind of sucks. Like, it's not what we want. But guess what? If we just sit around and do nothing, Moore's Law, 5 years from now, we're going to have this incredibly rich experience. We're going to have bandwidth that is infinitely more than we have now. We're going to have, all of these things are going to be so much better. We're going to be able to be extremely well positioned to provide an incredibly rich and amazing experience to the end user. We're going to build for that intersection of what we're building and the technology. It's okay that the technology is not there right now. And I think that is another thing that is just lost. And it's part of that patience is like, you are absolutely right. The technology already, and the fact that this $800 million transfer went across for like, almost nothing. Like the technology, we're already getting very close to there. And if you looked a couple of years ago, you would have been like even the base fees are infinity and like all of this. And it's just like, it's changing. The world is changing. The technology, the abundance of availability of all of this is just shifting. And what that will enable is really incredible. I think the people and the application developers who can focus on building for that world of not what exists right this second, but like where give it 5 years and like an order or two of magnitude. Like then what can you do? And I think it's near limitless because the underlying base of finance itself of money is incredibly massive.
I think that's such an important point. I say this all the time. I mean, no one talks about HTTPS. They just leverage it every single day and they might not even know. And we're going to get to a world where the user doesn't need to know. And I'm not sure the user ever needed to know that it was blockchain technology. The secondary market really created this focus on the assets and therefore on the separateness of the chains. We need to have a world where there is interoperability. You guys are creating that amongst the chains so that these application layers have the freedom to be able to build what they need to build to solve the problems that they see locally, that they see within their family units or wherever. That is the world that I want to see for sure. And I think that it is not a world where one chain wins all, because one chain shouldn't. There's so many different valuable things that exist in a variety of these different chains. I love Stellar. I think it's awesome, but I think that there are like lots of valuable things we can take away from other chains as well. So that is the world I see. I love it. Okay, so this is my last question. If you had to describe the future of blockchain interoperability in one sentence, the world that you're building towards, what would that sentence be?
Interesting. Sentence is tough. I should have prepped for this, but to try to keep it as concise as possible, I really think it is. I guess it's the invisible movement of data. Like really, that is my view. Is people don't think about us. People, like you said, nobody thinks about each day. Like it's there. It is embedded in everything that you do, and it's such a huge enabler. But people just don't. Nobody even learns the OSI model anymore. And I was just thinking about the internet stack. It is you don't need to have this layer of complexity. So I really think it is the invisible movement of data.
I really think, Brian, that we know that we've won when that actually happens. Because that means that the technology is actually doing what the technology is supposed to be doing to make it all happen. This was amazing. It was so great to talk to you. I feel like you made this, you learned that patience and you learned how to make the right bets in your prior career, and you really have done such an amazing job with respect to LayerZero. So congratulations, and thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
So that's it for today's episode of Block by Block. Huge thanks to Brian for joining and helping us understand how Omnichain assets will shape the next chapter of open finance. It's amazing that he talked about the fact that there was one transaction of $800 million that went across LayerZero for under $1 in fees. So for ecosystems like Stellar, that shift could unlock new interoperability, new markets, and new possibilities. Until next time, keep building.